For those of you wondering, I will indeed be doing a team-by-team breakdown, recap, analysis, and grading of the 2015 NFL Draft. I'm just going to be doing it in order from number 1 to number 32 in terms of original first-round order. So if I haven't covered your team yet, that means that they're not up yet. It means at some point in time I will in the next week to week and a half, so stay tuned. Make sure you check out all of these videos, and that way you can see where I'm right or wrong in 2 or 3 years when it comes to this 2015 NFL Draft. But ultimately, it's time to begin this series, and I begin with the team that had the #1 overall pick in the 2015 NFL Draft, and that is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They earned it based off the suck of their 2014 season, going 2-14, but really the primary reason this organization ended up with the #1 overall pick in 2015's NFL Draft is because of 2 reasons. 1, some poor drafting in previous years, and 2, most especially, missing on Josh Freeman in 2009. The Buccaneers prove what is so often proved, is that you have 2 types of teams, either those that have a quarterback and those that don't. And when you take a young quarterback and you miss on them, it sets your organization back years. And when you look at the selection of Josh Freeman back in 2009, you could argue that it set the organization back 5 years, which would have been up to 2014. And here we are, a chance for a new start and a new beginning for a Tampa Bay Buccaneers franchise that frankly needs one. Because this is a team that if you look back throughout their almost 40-year history now, there's one common theme. They've never really truly had that guy at quarterback. They've never had that franchise player there. Never. Whether that's a Doug Williams or a young Steve Young or a #1 overall pick like Vinny Testaverde or a high first-round pick like Trent Dilfer or another guy like a Sean King or somebody in this case like a Josh Freeman. This has always been a position of problem for this Tampa Bay Buccaneers organization. They've just never really truly gotten quarterback right. And even when you look back at their 2002 season, that Super Bowl season, they had Brad Johnson in the fold, and that was a veteran, solid quarterback, but most certainly not an in-house draft selection, not somebody they built up and developed, and not a long-term answer at the position. And that was a team that still won their title based off of the strength of, obviously, their defense and also their running game. So the Tampa Bay Buccaneers had to do one thing above all else in this 2015 NFL Draft. They were in position to take a potential franchise quarterback. They had to take a potential franchise quarterback. And that's what they did by selecting Jameis Winston, #1 overall out of Florida State. Now, obviously, this is a much ballyhooed, much talked about, and much debated prospect when we talk about Jameis Winston. For all the good things he's done on the field and some of the bad things he's done off on the field, you have all the baggage that seems to come with him and all the questions and concerns about him off the field. You know, this was in some ways, I think, a bit of a polarizing prospect, and in some ways, you look at him and there are serious concerns and questions because it's like, yeah, he could be that guy, but, or yeah, he has all the potential in the world, however. Well, when you're the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, in my opinion, for my money, this was the guy that they had to take. Sink or swim, this had to be the guy. This was the more pro-ready pocket passer compared to Marcus Mariota. This was the guy that was possibly more ready to win right away at the NFL level than Marcus Mariota. And based off of the situation that they had and the type of offense they were going to run, Jameis Winston was going to be the better fit than Marcus Mariota. Therefore, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers didn't get cute. They didn't outthink themselves. They didn't take the wrong quarterback for them. They didn't sit there and do any dumb trade down out of the #1 overall pick. They had their guy. They had targeted him for months. They vetted him. They did their research, and they ultimately walked up to the podium and took that guy on Thursday night. And that's exactly what needed to happen. And then afterwards, what do you do when you take a young franchise quarterback? You get him help. You get him protection, whatever the case might be. You focus on that offensive side of the ball. And you're talking about a Tampa Bay Buccaneers team that already devoted their entire 2014 NFL draft to the offensive side of the ball. Now they followed that up with a pair of second-round picks that were also on the offensive side of the ball in a pair of linemen, an offensive tackle from Penn State, Donovan Smith, and then Ali Marpet, the guard from Division III Hobart. You know, this is what you do. You take a quarterback and then you build around him. There are so many organizations that I see over the years that have failed to grasp this very basic fundamental concept. The second you take a quarterback, number 1 overall, or very, very high in the first round of the draft, that instantly becomes your franchise player. That instantly becomes the guy you must help, you must support, and you must build around. You do not sit there and devote all of your high draft picks to the defensive side of the ball. You don't do that. All of your hopes as an organization, the front office, the coaching staff, the players themselves, it hopes and dreams are all pinned on that franchise quarterback. You have to help him. You have no choice. And you look at Tampa Bay Buccaneers again. For the second straight draft, they largely ignored the defensive side of the ball. They only had 1 pick this time on the defensive side of the ball, which is better in 2014 when they had none. In this case, it was 4th-round linebacker Quan Alexander out of LSU. When you look at this draft, you also got to factor in the Logan Mankins trade. Here's a veteran offensive lineman that helps the interior of the Bucs offensive line. Obviously, a veteran protector and run blocker in front of Jameis Winston. So that's something that has to be factored into the trade. In terms of their best pick in 2015, it has to be Jameis Winston. He's that guy. And if he ends up being that guy, he's a franchise changer for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And in a division that has Cam Newton, Matt Ryan, and Drew Brees, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers needed their guy. They needed somebody they felt could potentially go toe-to-toe with those other quarterbacks in the division. And they got that guy. In terms of picks that could surprise, I look at Ali Marpet, the guy that was taken late in the 2nd round out of Hobart. Not a lot of people are familiar with him because he played at the Division III level. But here's a guy that is a big physical mauling run blocker that I think could be a long-term protector inside for Jameis Winston and also be a big asset in the running game. And I also look at Quan Alexander. I saw a lot of post-draft analysis talking about him potentially playing on the weak side and backing up Levante David and maybe being some type of special teams ace. I look at Quan Alexander, and I wonder if Lovie Smith might not want to try him out at inside linebacker, especially now that Mason Foster is gone. Maybe they think they've got an option already at inside linebacker, but maybe they don't. And with a Quan Alexander, with his instincts and his speed and athleticism and his ability, in my opinion, to go sideline to sideline, Lovie Smith might envision him as a middle linebacker in that cover 2 Tampa 2 scheme. But one thing I would really second guess maybe is their selection of Donovan Smith at pick number 34. Personally, I thought that was a little rich in terms of where they selected him. Maybe he could have been available a little bit later in round 2. Maybe they'd have been able to trade back a little bit. Maybe there were no options there. Maybe it was just a situation that was their guy and they had to take him. It was just at that particular case, I wouldn't have graded Donovan Smith as the best player on the board. And while I understand the philosophy of wanting to draft your franchise quarterback and then build around him, I'm not really sure that you should necessarily be reaching for need. Because even when you look at that offense, they could have used a young slot receiver. Maybe a guy like Devin Smith makes a world of sense. Or maybe you could have used a better option at tight end. Somebody else to go with, maybe Austin Seferian-Jenkins. Maybe a Max Williams is that guy. Maybe you look at that running back position and somebody like a TJ Yeldon. I just thought it was a little bit of a reach. Overall, though, I think the Buccaneers did what they had to do. If they only did one thing right in this draft, they had to come out of this draft with a potential young franchise quarterback, a potential franchise changer. And that's exactly what they've done. I like the fact that, once again, they devoted most of their draft to the offensive side of the ball because not only you're bringing in that young quarterback, you're potentially bringing that young quarterback into a really good situation. I have some concerns, though, about the fact that they have largely ignored the defensive side of the ball in the last 2 drafts because in a lot of ways you could argue that Lovie Smith's success or failures as a head coach at Tampa Bay are ultimately going to pinge on that defensive side of the ball. You can say all you want about Jameis Winston. That most certainly won't hurt, especially with guys like Vincent Jackson and Mike Evans and what have you. But you got to have more on defense, and they needed help at all 3 levels on the defensive side of the ball. And for the second straight year, they really didn't address that in the draft. Now, come 2016, 2017, those are probably going to be major areas of need that are going to be addressed quite often in a similar fashion to the way the offense has in the past 2 drafts. It's just in this particular case, they maybe could have done 1 lineman instead of 2 and maybe devoted a 3rd-round pick to taking a defensive player or maybe even that 2nd-round pick to a defensive player. So in terms of the overall grade for the Buccaneers, I'm going to give them a solid B. I don't think they did the best in this draft. They most certainly, I don't think, hurt their franchise or set themselves back for years. They helped themselves. They did what they had to do in a lot of ways. They were smart and pretty much sensible. And, ultimately, let's be honest, it doesn't matter if Donovan Smith becomes a Pro Bowler and Ali Marpet becomes an All-Pro. This draft will be measured by one player and one player alone, and that is Jameis Winston. And that will ultimately be what this draft class's grade hinges on long term for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I think they did a good job. They didn't get cute. They didn't outthink themselves. They did the right thing, and I think now the franchise is prepared to reap the rewards.